Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
I don't know about you, but have you ever tried to teach your child something and it never seems to get through to them? Has somebody else said the same thing to them and they take it on board immediately? Oh, the joys of parenting. Sometimes this can be put down to selective listening, but other times you might not be communicating your message in the style appropriate for the learner. Have you ever thought about how you learn, how you teach your kids, and whether their learning process is different to yours? Or have you actually never really thought about it? Well, let me tell you, it's certainly worth thinking about. We're constantly teaching our children, whether it's manners, life skills, reading or writing. And today we're talking about learning environments within traditional or alternative school systems or homeschooling. Now, a key factor to look at when teaching is who are you and who are you teaching? All of us learn in different ways, and my belief is that personality plays a big part in how we learn best. When we're talking about teaching, whether it's in the classroom or at home, finding out which teaching environment suits both you and the child you're teaching is imperative. So for me, it's really important for you to understand yourself, your child or your learner that is in your classroom and how they learn. Now, this is a pretty big topic to discuss, and there's a lot of information around it talking about personalities. So today I'm just going to start with looking at the introvert and the extrovert and their different learning styles. You yourself will be either an extroverted or introverted learner and teacher, and this will affect the way you teach and instruct. I was a school teacher many years ago before having any knowledge about personality types, and I'm an extrovert. My classroom was a loud, noisy environment, always buzzing with chatter and hopefully some laughter, and I loved it this way. When I spoke in the classroom, I used a loud voice. Now, this didn't mean I was angry, and the kids knew that, but I rarely asked for quiet or had rest time because I loved it this way. And then I learned about personality type, and I realised that my extroverted students were thriving in their natural habitat, so to speak. However, I also realised and understood that many of my introverted learners in my classroom who needed space and time out to get their learning processes working and to put down their thoughts and ideas would have been overwhelmed by the constant noise and bustle. With this knowledge in hand, I became a very different teacher. So let's look at the introvert as a learner. The introvert likes to think, talk, and think. In a classroom situation, it's important to give introverts time to prepare for anything they might have to say or do. Putting them on the spot and asking them a question, particularly in group time, is extremely stressful for them because they're often unable to process their thoughts during a short time frame that they've been given to respond to that particular answer. As a child, they're not necessarily up to discussing the fact that they haven't had enough time to give you an adequate answer, so they often sit in silence, embarrassed or upset, and refuse to answer. I know this because I was a teacher who did this. So preferably give them a time frame around a response. Ask them how they would like to respond. They might also choose a different way to present their answer, maybe by writing it instead of talking about it. So allow options around responses to questions. Introverts also enjoy listening, reading and writing when they can recharge and concentrate on what they're doing. Therefore, in your classroom or in your household, there needs to be peaceful spaces and quiet times to help them regain their energy so that they can work. Noisy classrooms or households can be really overwhelming for them. When my son was at school, he'd often come home to do his work because the classroom environment would be too noisy for him to find the right energy and headspace to learn. Now let's look at the extroverted learner. The extroverted learner has their answer to any question on the tip of their tongue. That is actually whether they are the student or the teacher. They talk, think, talk. They learn by talking because it's a way to process their information. As a teacher or a parent, it's important to allow the extrovert time for discussion around any topic being introduced. You might also have noticed that extroverts will often be talking about many other different things than the topic that actually has been set to discuss. So group work is really good for them, but it's your role to facilitate their thought process to get them off those other topics and bring them back to the one that needs discussing and ensure that their learning is actually taking place. It's necessary to have times where the extrovert is actually asked to engage in quiet thought processes. One essential skill for them to learn is listening, active listening. Now, this is a life skill, and the earlier taught, the better, as it will set the extrovert up for successful communication skills rather than talking over the top of others. Listening is also important for them for taking in information, as they can often miss a lot because they're talking so much. When Cassie used to come home from school with her homework, she and I would sit at our breakfast bar and talk about everything. We would talk about her day at school, parties, toys, and in later years, boys, clothes, and going out. And of course, her homework subject. Every time we would come back to the homework topic, she would then sit and work for an hour or so, and then we would break up for more talking. She'd be re-energised by the conversation and get back to work. It really helps her, as an extrovert, organise her head and process the material she needed to learn. Now let's remember, both types can then follow up with their secondary preference. It doesn't mean they can't do it. It's just a different way of them looking at the situation. I'm Kate Mason, and welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. Today I'm talking to Dr. Rebecca English. Rebecca is a researcher, teacher and mother whose work is concerned with parenting and education. She has an interest in the way parents make choices for their children that align with their beliefs about family, parenting and other factors. Her particular interest is in the choice of non-mainstream education, especially democratic schools and home education, and how these choices affect children's experience of agency and autonomy. Rebecca qualified as a teacher in 1998 and has been teaching for 20 years. She currently teaches English and integrated curriculum units at Queensland University of Technology. In 2016, she co-edited her first book, Genre Considerations in Online Consumption and Internet Use. She continues to publish widely in academic and popular press and has been interviewed for television programs such as The Project, ABC Mornings and SBS Vice's short productions. She has also written in dailies, including the Sunday Morning Herald, Courier Mail and other various publications. Hi Rebecca, welcome. It's lovely to have you with us today.
Thanks, Kate. It's lovely to see you.
Now, can you tell me your story? So has teaching always been part of what you imagined doing with your career, or did you start off with a different idea in mind?
So I started off, I actually finished school and I never wanted to see another school as long as I lived. I ran out of my elite all-girls private school screaming so loud my mother yelled at me later. It was a thing that happened, school, a thing that you survive. And I got to the end of school and I wanted to do something at university, and I'm not proud, but this is the truth. I had been watching Eddie and Patsy and Absolutely Fabulous, and I really thought public relations looked like an amazing job. I love writing. I love telling funny stories. I love using language in an interesting way. So I enrolled in a public relations degree, and I was partway into it, and my friend who had met in the degree said, I'm going to change to advertising. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to change to advertising too. So the two of us went and we did this ad degree. But I got to the end of the ad degree and I said to my mum, I really loved this degree, but I can't do this job. And my mother said to me, I never thought you could do this job. And I said, well, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do cocaine. I'm going to be a really terrible ad copywriter because I'm not going to be able to party and attract,
Fair.
corporate dollars. And she said, I will pay for another year of university if you do teaching. And I'm like, oh, fair enough. But then it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I absolutely adored teaching. My first year, I'm a high school teacher, English and what we now call HASS, Social Sciences. And I started in a really tough high school in a city outside of Brisbane. And then I changed to work for a Catholic school. I had gone to Catholic school, so I felt a real connection there. And it was really beautiful, Kate. It was such a beautiful job. I was able to help a lot of students who were incredibly disadvantaged. Most of them came from really very poor families. And, I think eventually that kind of grates on you. And, I have memories of, I remember sitting on the stairs with a student during exam block and saying to him, Lover, you don't need to be here. It's exam block. And he said to me, Miss, if I don't come here today, nobody will say my name and I won't get anyone smiling at me. So it's like, I feel like I really did my duty as a teacher, but eventually you go back to the well and the well is dry. So then I decided to do a Ph.D. and I actually didn't research homeschooling in my PhD. My interest is in educational choice. So my master's and my PhD and my work in home ed have always really been around why parents make choices and how that aligns with their beliefs about good family values. So my PhD, and then here I am.
Fantastic. So you, in your research and in what you do, your intuitive thoughts all about the people involved in the thing, the parents and the children as such. So how do you find people actually choose their schooling, and what kind of people choose the different types of schooling that are available out there? Because I'm a very conservative person, and traditional schooling is what I've loved. My kids have been great there and had a great journey. But I do understand that, there are other alternative schooling systems, and, of course, homeschooling, which we're going to talk about in a minute after COVID. So what gives you parents the voice and that you look at in your work?
So I'm really interested in what they think good parenting looks like. So for my parents, good parenting was about aspirationalism. That's really how I would describe my own parents. I grew up in a really very low socioeconomic suburb, and they were highly aspirational for my brother and I, both of whom hold doctoral degrees. And I think there's a really strong connection then with them choosing elite private schooling for us and sacrificing for us to go to those schools, and then sacrificing further because in the 90s they paid for us to go to university. So they were passionate advocates of education, and that's why they chose what they did. Other parents, say maybe you choose, a democratic school, for example, and there's quite a few of them in Australia.
So sorry, what would a democratic school look like? Sorry.
A democratic school, they're quite hard to characterise, but really they put the child at the centre. So most schools, what you do is based on the curriculum, what the government authorities say, or if you're Steiner and Montessori, what the background kind of philosophy says about how you educate. But with democratic schools, they take the child and they try and match that to the curriculum. So whatever the child is doing. So for example, it might be grade 6. They might have beginning of the term, they'll have a big meeting and they'll say, for example, what are we doing this term? These are some options for some themes. And then the kids might pick a theme, and then from that, they will find links to the curriculum from there. So if you're a particular type of parent, that obviously is going to align with your beliefs. And it's going to be very different from the quite authoritarian, quite right-wing family that I came from. You can see how quite right-wing
Yes.
people aren't really going to be into, oh, God, let's let the kids choose the theme and we'll do the work for you. So, yes, it's very strongly aligned with values.
Yes. And then we go and look at homeschooling as such,
Yes.
and parental types that might choose that type of thing.
Oh, absolutely. Home education is really different. And in the sort of 10 years that I've really been looking at it, it's changed radically, Kate. So when I first started looking at it in Queensland, there were about 900 kids who were doing it. And most of them were the kind of stereotype you have in your mind about homeschooling. So when you think about homeschooling and you're nodding along, and I can see that you're thinking they're either fundamentalist Christians who are really hardcore about young earth creationism, they don't want their kids to learn any evolution, or they're the hardcore off-grid hippies who, drop their first kid in a field and then subsequently with each other kid. Maybe the first one they might have got their placenta turned into pills, but after that, no, they're just cooking it on the barbecue. And that's the stereotype, right? That's what people think about when they think about homeschooling. But over the last 10 years, I think it's changed. And my contribution to the field, theoretically, if I may, is that those people that I described, the stereotypes, are deliberate homeschoolers. They were always going to homeschool. Nothing the government did would make them engage with institutional education or with government that manages institutional education. But I think the vast majority now, so in Queensland now, the numbers are being released today on the 28th of October. I'm yet to get them. But last I heard, they were about 8,500. So we've gone from 900 to 8,500 in the last 10 years. So that's quite a growth, and it is off a low base. 900 is small, but 8,500 is 2.5 probably, reasonably sized P-12 schools, quite large P-12 schools. If you were a principal of half of that, you'd be on really, really good money because it's a big school. So the sort of makeup of the community along with those numbers have changed, and increasingly they're what I call accidentals. They didn't intend to homeschool. Most of them didn't start off homeschooling, but they found that for whatever reason, school just didn't work for their child. So there's quite a bit of identification with, say, ASD, ADHD, oppositional defiance, a lot of anxiety, quite a lot of depression, quite a lot of school refusal, which I think the Senate is about to start an inquiry into. And so I think that there's a really strong kind of morass of disaffection in institutional schooling that I see in home ed. But if I may, Kate, I don't think it's exclusively home ed. There's a lot of people choosing distance for whatever reason. There's a lot of people who are just school refusers for whatever reason. And there's a lot of teachers leaving the profession for a whole bunch of reasons. And I genuinely believe that all of those issues are connected in some way.
Right, with the actual homeschooling situation.
All of it. All of it is a symptom of a wider problem, I think, Kate.
And so we were looking at COVID actually opening up the avenue of homeschooling, whether people liked it or not, to everybody out there. And the possibility is that certain people who had never done it before may have grasped that now and are continuing to do so.
It was a risk-free trial.
Yes, it was. It
was a risk-free trial. Yeah.
You had to. Yeah. You basically had to do it. Now, that would be my biggest personal nightmare. So I was very happy to palm my children off to school and have them handle everything that came along, and the same for myself. So for me, homeschooling, I mean, what kind of directives do they have to get back to the government, in homeschooling and taking your child through? And I know there are benefits, so we talk about the benefits, but there are also negative in there as well. Look, I look at personalities and understand totally different personalities. Different things suit different people all the time. We're all very different, and I can see that. But I'm just wondering if you can just give us a reflection of some of the positives of it and then some of the negatives that you see around it yourself. And like I say, how do they actually get to a level that the government accept?
Okay, so maybe we'll start with the government stuff. So because education at school level is managed by state and territories in Australia, each state and territory has their own rules, and some states and territories are really havens for home educators and some are not. So I'm in Queensland, and the requirement in Queensland is when you decide to homeschool, you notify the school that you're going to withdraw your child. Then you immediately fill out a form to apply to the home education unit through the Department of Education. Now, every state and territory has a different arrangement for when you withdraw from school and how long you get as a sort of stopgap between being at school and home education being approved. So in Queensland, immediately it's assumed that you've applied, so that's all you have to do. You've met your government requirements for compulsory education. Then, either with that application or a few weeks later, you submit a plan for what your child is going to do for the next 12 months. Now, how you do that plan is going to depend on your child and you and the kinds of experiences that you're going to be able to offer that child. So it will be different for different families. Your philosophy will play into that too. So some people are really hardcore. They're going to want to buy, say, Homeschool in a Box, and they're going to want them to do all their planning for them, or they're going to pay people I know who will write plans for you. At the other end are going to be the unschoolers, who are really relaxed. They believe in no curriculum, so led completely by the child, and I toss my hat to them. I think that is the hardest thing in the world to do, to provide those opportunities and understand that child and be able to interact with them. And you may have other children with you as well, so to do that individualization, honestly, amazing. But most people sort of fall somewhere in the middle. They might start off quite structured and become more unstructured over time, but it looks different in different families. Then at the 10-month mark, the government will send you a link and you'll have to upload a report. Now, with home education in Queensland, there are two requirements. The child has to be given a high-quality education and they have to show progress over a time span, the 10 months. So you choose samples to show that, and your samples can be anything. Photos of the child doing something, screen caps if they've made a video, actual written samples from the child. But you have two samples, sample A, and then progress is shown with sample B. And you are really supposed to, although it's not in the legislation, they always expect English, maths, and one other subject. So that's all you have to do. In different states, in New South Wales, someone comes to your house or online and interviews you and may interview the child if the child feels comfortable with that, to talk about your progress, your plans, what's moving, how you're going, that kind of thing. There's different levels of engagement with the home education community. So in Tasmania and Victoria, there's a really strong engagement with the community. In Queensland, there's some engagement. In New South Wales, it looks like they engage, but they don't really with the community. So it all depends on which state and territory you're in. So I think that kind of leads into a little bit of benefits and drawbacks. So the benefits are that, having been a teacher, unlike with a school, whatever I said about differentiated instruction, there is no way I could meet the 28 kids in my class. And my school was poor. I used to teach computer studies, and I remember turning up to computer studies and I had 28 in the class, and maybe 10 of my computers worked, and they're doing a Voc Ed certificate. So while they're trying to all individually work towards Cert 2, they're having to take turns on the computer, and they're a bit colourful. So having that sort of 18 who don't have a computer at that moment, not, I don't know, wrestle or kill each other or smoke drugs in the corner or whatever, was quite difficult. So I understand that one of the benefits are that you can individuate that instruction. Now that also comes with a drawback. So one of the biggest criticisms of all private education is that it removes children from a system and provides privileges that are not available to other kids. So I understand how that is a criticism of home education, but I think politely but firmly disagree with that as a criticism.
Hey, parenting's a tough gig. There are no rule books, just you and any well-meant advice, books that don't always hit the mark, and, well, maybe your well-meaning mother-in-law telling you what to do. No one knows your kid or you. Contact me and we'll find out how you can connect to your most important treasure. thepersonalitycoach.com.au.
So the other criticism of private education in all forms is that it encourages sort of wealth hoarding in certain classes of people. So middle-class parents or aspirational parents with money, like mine, send me to a really good school where I meet people who I still know and who still help me in my career, and that kind of concentrates advantage in small groups. I think the same criticism is often levelled at home education, but I don't think it really works in the sense that women give up their job to do this. And Kate, it's women's work, right? Dropping the kids to school is women's work. Taking them to Taekwondo is women's work. Knowing whose party is coming up and what you need to purchase is women's work. Homeschooling is women's work. So unfortunately, the short-term impact is to the women's income. They have to rely on their partner or the benefit system in order to earn enough money. And that has medium and long-term implications. So, medium-term implications are over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, it affects your capacity to advance in your career because you don't have that recency of experience, recency of practice. And long-term, as you retire, you have much less in your superannuation pool than you otherwise would. So those are genuine criticisms. The interesting thing is that one of the ways we could counter that is if the government paid home educators to do the job. And in New Zealand, for example, home educators are able to draw on a sort of stipend to get money while they do home educate. Most home educators would say, no, thank you to that, because there's a bit of a libertarian streak, I think, in the community.
Yep.
Even if they're not hardcore out there anti-vax types, they do obviously have a sense that maybe institutions have failed them, so I don't want any of your money because what I swap for that money is my autonomy and my agency. So does that answer that question?
It does. It does. And the other thing, look, lack of communication with the outer world. I mean, do people socially, I'm just thinking if my kids were home all day with me, I might have killed them. But also the fact that socializing is so important. I mean, looking at communication now, the fact that COVID actually cut everybody off from each other and people were at great loss, and there's so many mental health issues happening at the moment, and communication is so important. That's the stuff that I talk about too, being able to communicate with other people, live in what is the real world, understand you're not going to succeed all the time, all of those things. If you're being homeschooled and it's a very small environment, how does all of that happen? I mean, I understand that some people will take their children to play groups and do things like that. But as they get older, do people homeschool their children in years 11 and 12? does that happen. And as a parent too, as a mother, I wouldn't be qualified to do that for my child. They wouldn't make it, it just seems like such a hard gig. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think there's three questions here, Kate. The first one is about socialising. So socialising is one of those things that make parents' head explode when I ask them in home ed communities, because they will argue that the home in home education doesn't refer to where the education happens. That's the locus of control. So if I send my kids to school, I sign them up to, say, I don't know, their local state school. They are in locus parentis. They take over the responsibility of educating. I no longer have to do it. In home education, all I do is not sign over my child to a school. So home doesn't refer to where most things happen. Home educators are spoiled for choice with lots of social activities. So usually they will join 1, sometimes 5, sometimes 12 co-ops, and they will have get-togethers and meetups. Now, a co-op is usually quite structured. It's a cooperative, so parents will teach based on their own skill set. And increasingly, teachers are choosing home education too. So a co-op that I'm really familiar with has 3 teachers in the co-op. All 3 of them teach different things. There's a former police officer, there's, I think, a lawyer, there's an accountant. So all of these people provide opportunities for the child, and they do activities that's really difficult to do on your own in a home education family. Then there's meetups, much more informal. Kids hang out with their friends and just spend time together. So that's sort of the socialization one. Oh, and there's nothing stopping home educated children also doing the activities that school kids do. So, just because, I don't know, netball is on from 4:30 to 6:30, you can still go to netball. Nothing stops you joining netball.
Yeah. No, great answer. Thank you.
No, that's okay.
Next one.
Thanks. Thank you. Oh, stop it. And so the next question was about year 11 and 12. So the numbers in Queensland drop off markedly for year 11 and 12. By 17, you can no longer be registered as a home educator in Queensland. So that's about sort of grade 11 anyway. So it's really difficult to know through the department's figures what they do. Most of them, I think, will start TAFE at about 14, 15, use the home ed unit as their school, and then they will do TAFE subjects like a lot of school kids do. And then I guess by year 11 and 12, they will sit the SAT or the STAT test, and they will do early entry into university if that's the pathway they want to go down, or they might join TAFE and do an apprenticeship, and that's generally where they wind up. So they kind of just get an earlier start than anybody else on wherever they want to go. There's nothing stopping home educated young people from going to university. My master's student, Leah Moyer, she just submitted her thesis for examination, and she looked at parents' transitions out of home ed, out of school to post-school. And she found that there was a plethora of different skill sets the kids had and different job opportunities they saw, everything from, being a medical doctor to being a mechanic to working with animals to all sorts of different things. And because the child had time, and again, there's that privilege, they were able to think and reflect deeply on who they were as a person and what they wanted to achieve in their lives. But there is nothing stopping them going to university if that's what they want to do. Nothing stopping them getting an apprenticeship if that's what they want to do. Nothing stopping them work at the local Coles if that's what they want to do, and if you can find any jobs in retail. So I think that's sort of the second question. The third one was about parents' qualifications to teach. I think there's sort of 2 answers here. The first one is, when you talk to home educators, at no point do they think of themselves as a teacher. They're always Johnny's mum or Jane's mum. That's always what they are. And they never want to be a teacher for a whole series of reasons, but that's who they are. They're always their mum. And because they have time and because they aren't paying exorbitant school fees, if they have access to financial resources, then they will use that to access the services that they need. So if you have a child who's struggling a little bit with maths but needs to do engineering, say, you'll just get them tutored. If you know they need the SAT or the STAT, the STAT test, to go to university early, get them tutored so they learn how to do the test, and then they've got multiple opportunities to sit that test. Nothing stopping them. If they want to do medicine, they'll need to sit the GAMSAT. So why aren't they starting GAMSAT prep at 15 and 16? They've got the time to do that because they're not at school all day and they're not worrying about their senior subjects. So really, they access resources. And in the community, there's lots of conversations with people who have skills, and people trade skills and share skills. So it's actually a really interesting kind of cooperative kind of environment. And much like my experiences of being a teacher, teaching was very much about paying it forward. And you see that very much when you monitor those homeschool groups online.
That is so great to hear, because in my head, I would never have visualized any of that you've just painted for us. So it's really great to know that. I mean, I just always think I have a hard time getting my children to hang up their towel, even at the ages that they are now. So, as I say, it obviously is for certain types of people, and choices obviously out there now to a far greater degree, and people are looking at these things. And I do understand with mainstream school, the things that are happening in mainstream school is very hard. And my son is a teacher out there at the moment as well, even though I told him not to be, because it's really hard work. And he understands, and I say you should always listen to your mother, but he doesn't anyway. It is a really stressful situation for teachers. There's a huge load on teachers these days. And like you say, when I went out teaching, I had 33 in my class. And, you could never actually concentrate on one single person ever. So the advantages of homeschooling that you've just told us about and painted for us is actually amazing. And it's really good to hear the alternative to the mainstream and what you've seen, because most people don't research it and look into it to that degree. So
I wish more people would, actually.
Yes. Yeah. And I think like you say, with COVID having brought that in, those people that would have liked it and enjoyed it, undoubtedly, obviously out there's probably an increase, is there, in the amount of people that are currently homeschooling due to that?
Absolutely. So the numbers were going up prior to COVID. There was a slow incremental increase as people became a bit more disaffected. But I think what happened with COVID was that parents sat beside their child and watched them interact with the teacher and other children in a new way. And for many of them, they weren't sure that they were happy with what was going on, or they realized how many barriers their child faced. So maybe they were struggling with reading and no one had identified it. So I think that's also part of what happened as well. So COVID was a shot in the arm. So maybe they were bodybuilding beforehand, the home ed numbers, and then they all took steroids with COVID. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's really great. It's a really great thing for us to leave on, in the sense that for anybody out there that is possibly thinking about it, then it's really well worth researching it and looking into that. And for those people that are really happy with the current schooling that their child has, that's all great and all wonderful. But yeah, it's been wonderful hearing that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And your fun sense of humour. And I look forward to catching up with you again sometime. Maybe that'd be wonderful.
Oh, that'd be lovely. Thanks, Kate. It's been very enjoyable.
Whether you choose homeschooling, mainstream, or alternative schooling, it's your choice as a parent to choose what you think is right for your child. Just remember your child's not you, and knowing who they are personality-wise will also help you make those choices in finding the education that suits them and yourself. Discover the personalities in your household or your classroom and find out who are the introverted learners and extroverted learners. Use this knowledge to help them engage in the learning process. It's very important for both types. Introverts because they're in an extroverted world and they can't escape the need to extrovert. And extroverts because it is their world and they need to learn to listen to hear the voice of others. Understand who you are as a teacher and a parent and learn to understand their differences yourself. For the introverted learner, as a teacher, allow them space, allow them time, give them breaks from the noise, and let them have quiet learning times. For the extroverted learner, let them work in groups. Bring them back to the topic at hand. Help them gather ideas from external sources, give them a variety of topics to choose from, and give them activities that encourage their listening. If you teach your students and children to understand people's differences, the better they'll be prepared for the world of people, communication, and relationships. I'm Kate Mason. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you would leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about this podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my newly launched book, Who is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and we'll see you next time.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.